Hello, welcome back to FM Live. My name is Mike Usrey, and today I'm going to talk about what may be kind of a mundane thing, but I know a lot of us take for granted, and that is getting ready for warmer weather. A lot of us, myself included, drive our Miatas throughout the winter, and so there is a little bit of a transition period from when things start warming up from being cold and frigid all throughout the winter, that you do need to make some changes to your car so that way you can have a Miata that performs its best. And I'll also discuss those that if you don't drive your car through the winter, you actually put it in storage, there may be some things that you may need to take into account when you do bring your car out of storage, so that way it's ready to go and perform at top level. In a nutshell, this is about what things should I be doing to get my car ready, tip-top shape for the warm weather. And, you know, if you're in Colorado or somewhere similar like this, where it's only just now starting to warm up, this is about the 32nd false spring that we've had just this year. So my condolences if you're like us and you're still waiting for it to actually warm up. But basically, there's things that we need to start looking into doing. And first of all, I'm going to break this down into a couple of categories. And my first category is basically going to be finding out what things have you been neglecting, or what things have you set off that need to be done that you now need to do it since the weather is starting to warm up. So these types of things that I'd be looking into is pop the hood for once. If you're like me, that you drive it all throughout the winter just to get it to work or get, wherever you're going, but not necessarily to do any kind of wrenching, because I hate wrenching in cold weather, then you typically have the engine bay closed up and the hood is always down during the winter time. Now that it's warming up, pop the hood, take a look. I'm going to be looking at fluid levels. Does the clutch master, does your brake master have fluid? Does it look really dark? Okay, it's probably time to change that fluid. Check your engine oil level, make sure that you actually have engine oil. Things like that. I'm also going to be looking at a lot of the rubber components under the hood. So checking belts, checking hoses, also checking spark plug wires, especially if you have stock spark plug wires on NAs and NBs. Any of the rubber kind of components underneath your engine, underneath your hood, on your engine, they will wear out, they will degrade over time, and with big temperature fluctuations, such as when the car is running and getting up to 200-ish degrees Fahrenheit, and then cooling way off in the winter, that big temperature fluctuation tends to make a bigger difference in degradation on those rubber components. So this is a good time to check it out. Do you need to replace any belts or hoses or other rubber things underneath the hood? It's a good time to do it. Besides that, another couple of good things that are rubber related that I would recommend checking are tires. So if you are actually driving your car in the winter, like many of us here, we are using winter tires, and hopefully your winter tires are in good shape. And anyway, if you do have winter tires, it's about time that you swap them out for some warm weather summer tires, or at least all seasons if you're going to be doing something like that and not too aggressively driving it. But checking your tires to make sure that they are not cracked. If you don't know, on your sidewall, you actually will have some dates on here. This particular tire, I don't know if we're going to see it on this one, Travis. Yeah, it's probably not going to show up on this video. Tell you what, we will link a picture down in the comments below and we'll show you what we're talking about. But there's a date stamp on your tires that, if you don't know, it's probably a good thing that you go check, especially if you already have had these tires for a few years and you're not really sure how old they are, because when you buy new tires, oftentimes they'll have sat at a tire shop for maybe a year or two before you actually pick them up and they go on a car for the first time. So generally tires are good for about 5 to 6 years before they start weather checking and cracking and things like that. So check the dates on your tires to make sure that they're not getting too old, and check for overall cracks, stress fractures, any kind of abnormalities in the rubber itself. Pretty straightforward. Other things underneath the car that I'd be checking would be brakes, brake hoses, any of the clutch lines, any, again, rubber components on the car. So these are also things that being underneath the car, they're going to be submitted to a lot of road debris. If you do drive the car in the winter, then it's going to see a lot of ice, snow, potentially salt, and those kinds of things will also wear down on that rubber components over time. So check out all of the rubber stuff underneath the car, not just what you see on top. Brake pads is another good one to check as well. So get the car up in the air. If you don't have wheels that you can look through, take a look at your pads. How much thickness do your pads have? Are they ready to be changed out? Those kinds of things. So basically this is a going through the car, checking it over, making sure that you are seeing some of the obvious stuff that might have been neglected over the winter, that you hadn't been looking at it because you don't want to wrench in it, you're just driving it, or it's been in a storage unit, those kinds of things. Another helpful hint, if you haven't started doing this or haven't been doing this all along, you should definitely start with a maintenance schedule on your car. Tech tip here, your owner's manual actually has a section towards the back. If you haven't cracked that open, you should probably take a look. There is a place where you can actually write down all of the maintenance you've done on your car and keep track of the scheduled things that every 10, 20,000 miles, 60,000 miles, whatever, that you need to change out on the car. Check your book, check your maintenance history. Is it time to go ahead and do a timing belt? Is it time to go ahead and do, anything that you've been putting off? This is an excellent time to look into that history if you haven't. So unfortunately for that kind of stuff, that's the boring stuff, the less exciting stuff, but it's the stuff that if you're like me and you haven't been paying attention to it all winter, it's good to check into. Also, another good one that I just remembered is your battery. So your battery on the top will have usually little stamps for the year and the month that it was produced. Usually batteries are good for 4, 6, 7 years, something like that. So check the dates on your battery, see if it's getting old. If you're at all unsure, go have it tested. Easy peasy. But this is the kind of unexciting stuff that it's just a good idea to make sure that you have it done. Look into it now, because you don't want to have to do this kind of stuff in the middle of the nice driving weather when you want to be out driving. So get the maintenance stuff taken care of now. So besides that kind of stuff, if you're going to be doing any kind of transitional, because of the temperature specifically, kind of changes to the car, besides changing out winter tires for all seasons or summer tires, another thing that we would recommend for NAs and NBs in particular is that if you are running around with a advanced ignition timing setup, so instead of running at 10 degrees before top dead center, it's popular that as long as you have good fuel, that you bump up your ignition timing to 12 or even 14 degrees. So you can do this as long as you're not getting ping, but if you are running around when it's cold, you're less likely to have issues with ping or detonation. So when it gets warmer, that's going to be more likely that you have issues with detonation. So to avoid that, either one, make sure that you're running the best possible octane fuel that you can get a hold of, and or you might consider reducing your ignition timing down to 12 degrees or something a little less aggressive than wherever you're set right now, because you have a little bit more wiggle room with the cold winter air that you're running around letting your engine suck up while you're driving in the wintertime. Another good thing that you can do, if you are planning on tracking the car especially, is that during the wintertime, you do need a stronger mix of antifreeze in your coolant mixture. And this applies to all Miatas. So if you are running around, especially somewhere that it does get down into the freezing temperatures over the winter, but you're planning on tracking the car over the summertime, then you might consider actually watering down your coolant mixture a little bit, so that way you have a little bit more thermal headroom for when you're working the car hard. The reason being is that water, and specifically you should be using distilled water, not just tap water, because you don't want all the materials to contaminate your cooling system. Minerals. I think I said materials. Minerals to contaminate your cooling system, is that water will actually transfer heat better than antifreeze does. So if you have a higher mixture of distilled water versus antifreeze, your coolant will actually be more efficient at moving that heat out of your engine and away from the car. So you might consider draining a little bit of antifreeze out and adding a little bit of distilled water. We usually like to aim for about a 70-30% mix for most of our cars during the summertime at least, and that's 70% distilled water, 30% antifreeze. That way you've got enough of the antifreeze for lubrication and anti-corrosion properties, but you have a much larger percentage of that distilled water for cooling capacity. Let's see. Oh, here's an often forgotten one. This is also one of the not so exciting ones. My apologies. But if this is a car that you plan on doing any kind of road trips with, if you drive long distances, especially if you're going to come down and see us here for our Flyin Miata summer camp, June 9th through the 11th this year. We'll drop some more information in the details down below so that way you can check out what's going on. But if you're doing a long road trip, and especially if this is your only vehicle, then have you put together, hopefully, and maintained your emergency kit? So an emergency kit in your car should contain things like a jack, some jumper cables, tow straps or ratchet straps, some basic tools, wrenches, screwdrivers, those kinds of things, duct tape, flashlights, blankets. That's a good one, especially if you're traveling long distance and you're going through a bunch of middle of nowhere. Water bottles, maybe even some MREs, again, if you're traveling through a bunch of nowhere. A portable radio, and the one that a lot of people forget about is that if you bring any medication with you or have backup medication, make sure that you check the date on the bottles, that they are not expired, because that won't work very well. So check out your emergency kit, make sure that you've got all of this equipment, and of course, if there's anything else that specific to you that you think would be important to bring along, throw it in there, but check that now because, again, this is boring stuff that you don't want to have to be messing with when the weather's nice and you just want to be out driving the car. So beyond these things, one of the things I like to do to get my car ready for the warmer months, once all of the false springs are over and hopefully the last of the snow has fallen, is to actually do a deep clean on the car. Over the winter, they get grimy. There's all kinds of yuck on up, and you don't want to wash your car, or at least not very often if you're driving the car in the winter, because it's just going to get mucky again. Now that the weather is starting to turn, you can take the car out and do a deep clean. So go out to your favorite car wash, or if you've got the setup at home, give it a nice clean top to bottom, inside, outside. Get all of that muck off as much as you can, because that'll make it much easier to wash the car when it's still kind of cool, at least in the mornings, rather than waiting till it's really hot, because it actually can be harmful for your paint. It leaves water spots, that kind of stuff, if you're washing the car in direct sunlight when it's really hot. So now's a good time to do that, get everything cleaned up, get it all gussied up and pretty for the summertime, because again, you want to be spending as much time driving the car when it's warm and nice, not taking care of it. That's why we're talking about this now. Get it out of the way. And then the actual fun stuff here. So now that we've done kind of a little bit of a going through the history, looking at what needs to be fixed, actually fixing those things, replacing or swapping out the parts that need to be for summertime, and doing any maintenance that needs to happen, the last thing besides cleaning is to do any mods. So if this is the year that you plan on going out and doing some track time, you're planning to do autocross days, you're planning to do a long road trip, whatever, you've got big plans, what things didn't you do last year that you want to do this year to make your car even better? So you might be considering doing a radiator swap, so that way you can better handle all of the turbo lap times that you're going to be doing. Maybe you're going to be doing a bunch of long distance driving, so this would be a good opportunity to replace your radio and get something a little bit more modern that has Bluetooth. Or maybe it's time to do a little bit of sound deadening in the inside of the car to make it more comfortable. Or maybe you need to do a little bit of exterior mods because you're going to be going to a lot more shows, so it's time to do a wrap job on your car, or it's time to do new wheels and tires and change up the look. Basically, this is the fill in the blank with what things do I want to do this year, because you knock them out now, you actually get longer to enjoy over the year when you're driving the car in the warm weather, rather than putting it off and then doing it when it's good and hot and having already driven for several months without it. I find, personally myself, I really like to get into the mods that I know I want early on, or as early as I can, because that way in the future I get to spend that much more time enjoying those things that I did, all the effort that I put into the car, rather than saying, oh, I wish I could do this, or I'm going to do that a little bit later. You know, There's reasons, of course, that you might not, but I recommend do those mods that you know you're going to enjoy as soon as you can. You get more enjoyment out of the car as a whole. So let's jump over to some of the questions that we got before this video started. One of the questions we got was, when pulling your car out of storage, should you change the oil before your first startup, or should you let it warm up? So personally, I would recommend that if you're going to be doing long-term winter storage, you should actually change the oil before you put the car in storage. The reason being is that as you drive the car, there is going to be some exhaust gas, some fuel, some other debris that will work its way down into the engine oil over time, and that's just natural. That's why you change the oil. But if you let it sit in your engine for months or however long at a time, all of that debris can actually become slightly acidic, and it will start to eat at the surfaces inside your engine. So if you let it sit there for long periods of time, you can actually allow it to do damage just from sitting. So if you are going to be storing a vehicle, really any kind of vehicle, for any extended period of time, let's just say 3-4 months or longer, likely, or the best case scenario, is change your oil before you put it in storage. That way, all the oil that's in there is as clean and uncontaminated as possible, and that way you don't have to worry about all of the buildup and debris and acidic that's in there, so that way you're not damaging your engine simply by leaving it parked. However, if you haven't done that yet, then do the oil change as soon as you can. I would still let it warm up, because when you change the oil, you want as much of it to drain out as possible. So let the engine warm up at least a little bit. You don't have to change it cold. It's not going to hurt anything to change it cold, but it's always a good idea to have the engine at least a little bit warm. One, because anything that might have been stuck to the inside of the engine on the walls, again, it gets washed down into the sump. And oil, when it's warm, it's less viscous, so it moves and flows a little bit quicker and easier. It's easier to drain it all out, basically. So another one related to this is, will your oil start to collect moisture over winter storage? And yes, it can, especially after your oil has been used and has started to break down, because that's when it starts to absorb contaminants, including water. So water, when it mixes with any kind of ferrous metal, or most ferrous metals, it will start to cause at least a little bit of surface rust. And again, you would need to leave it in your engine for a long time for it to cause any severe damage, but if you want to avoid that, change your oil before you store it. That way it's as clean and gives you the best possible chance at making sure it's ready to go in the springtime as possible. This one's about mods, that they're planning to change out the radiator when the car was in storage, but that didn't happen. So now that it's starting to warm up, is it okay to still change it after it's sat for a few months, or do you need to go drive the car before I change out any of the cooling system for upgrades? Coolant, hopefully, is not going to be contaminated as much or anywhere near as much as engine oil is, because none of your coolant passages should be subject to having exhaust gases or fuel or anything else that might come into contact with it. If you do, you've got bigger problems. Assuming a healthy cooling system and a healthy engine, your coolant is very separate from everything else. So if it's warm or cold, or if it's sat for a few months, it's not really going to make that big of a difference unless it's been neglected. So if you have no antifreeze and your system is really rusty, you got to clean it out first. But otherwise, change out your radiator whenever it works best for you. It's not going to hurt anything as far as it's being sat for a few months at this point. And I think, actually, do we have any live questions? Not at the moment. Good. Okay. All right. Well, this was supposed to be a pretty straightforward, quick and easy video. I hope that you learned something. Again, most of this is stuff that we probably already knew, or at least you kind of knew in the back of your head, but maybe it wasn't that exciting, so you haven't worried about it just yet. But things are starting to warm up, so Go ahead and take care of these things now. That way you can enjoy your car for all of the warm months that you just want to be out driving it. Hopefully you learned something. If you did, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff that you do on social media. And of course, if you have comments or suggestions about what other things you'd like to see us talk about in the future, drop those down in the comments below as well. And thank you again for your attention. We will see all of you in our next FM Live. Thanks again. My name is Mike. Have a great day.